Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in High School of the Dead and built a harem with Saeko and Rei? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Day the World Died. The air over Fujimi City tasted of rust and stale promises, a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. On the rooftop of the academy, where the wind was a clean, sharp thing that cut through the urban haze, Naruto Uzumaki leaned against the safety fence, his eyes half closed. Below, the school courtyard buzzed with the familiar rhythms of late afternoon. Clue. Stirs of students ambled toward the gates, their chatter a faint, meaningless hum. A few practiced swings on the baseball diamond, the crack of a bat a sharp counterpoint to the distant, mournful cry of a single siren. He had lived in this world for 18 years. 18 years of quiet normalcy, of muffled memories that felt like dreams from another life. A life of roaring crowds and earth-shattering battles. Of fox demons and god trees. Here, his greatest challenge was advanced calculus and pretending the faint whisker-like marks on his cheeks were just peculiar birthmarks. He'd learned the language, the customs. The quiet desperation of a world without chakra, a world that felt muted. His own energy, the vast, oceanic presence he'd once commanded, was a slumbering giant within him, difficult to rouse and exhausting to wield in this spiritually barren reality. It made him feel heavy, anchored. A light footstep approached from behind. He didn't need to turn. The scent of cherry blow, SSOM shampoo and the specific cadence of her walk were as familiar as the ache in his phantom arm. Hiding from the world again, Naruto-kun. Rei Miyamoto came to a stop beside him, her long, auburn hair catching the afternoon sun. She propped her elbows on the railing, mirroring his pose but with a restless energy he lacked. Her brow was furrowed with a familiar, manufactured concern. You know, people are going to start thinking you're a ghost if you keep vanishing like this. He offered a lazy, one-sided smile. Maybe I am. She nudged him with her shoulder, a playful gesture that had become their routine. Don't be morbid. Takashi was looking for you. We were going to grab some food. You two go ahead, he said, his gaze drifting back over the city. The siren was closer now, joined by another. A knot of unease, tight and cold, formed in his gut. It was an old feeling, a soldier's instinct he hadn't needed in nearly 2 decades. I think I'll stay up here a bit longer. The air's better. Rei followed his gaze, her expression softening. Is everything okay? You've been distant, more than usual. She hesitated, then her voice dropped. It's been a year since, you know. Hisashi. He finally turned to look at her fully. He knew she meant well. Hisashi, her previous boyfriend, held back a year and now a classmate of Naruto's, had been a decent enough guy. His abrupt departure her life had left a void she was still trying to fill, often by projecting her worries onto others. Naruto was a convenient target. I'm fine, Rei, promise. He reached out and ruffled her hair, a brotherly gesture that made her scowl. Go on. Don't keep your knight waiting. She swatted his hand away, a blush coloring her cheeks. He's not my knight, and you're impossible. She started to turn away, then paused. Don't stay up here too long. It's creepy. He watched her go, the unease in his stomach coiling tighter. The sirens weren't stopping. They were converging. He scanned the streets below, his eyes sharper than any normal human's. He caught the motion near the school's main gate. A single figure, shambling, stumbling with a jerky, unnatural gait. A few teachers, including the stern-faced Mr. Tashima, were moving to intercept him, their body language a mixture of annoyance and caution. Naruto went perfectly still. The wind whipped his blonde hair across his face, but he didn't blink. Something was wrong. Fundamentally, existentially wrong. The man's movements weren't those of a drunk or an addict. They were the puppeteered motions of a broken thing. He saw Mr. Tashima grab the man's shoulder. He saw the man turn, impossibly fast. He saw the teacher recoil, a hand flying to his own arm, a dark stain blossoming on his white shirt. And then the screaming began. The hum of the school courtyard shattered into a cacophony of shrieks. Naruto vaulted over the railing, landing silently on the concrete roof. His entire demeanor had changed. The lazy, distant high schooler was gone, evaporated in an instant. In his place stood a commander. His blue eyes were glacial, his posture a study in coiled tension. He wasn't watching the chaos anymore. He was analyzing a battlefield. He saw the first domino fall. Tashima, clutching his arm, convulsed. He fell to his knees, then pitched forward. For a moment, he was still. Then, his body began to twitch. He rose, his head lolling at an unnatural angle, and lunged for the nearest screaming teacher. The infection spread like fire through dry grass. Bite, fall, rise, attack. It was a cascade of brutal, primal violence. Students, paralyzed by disbelief, were swarmed. The ones who ran were often too slow, their panicked flight leading them into dead ends. This isn't a riot, Naruto thought, a cold dread washing over him. It's a plague. His first instinct was singular, absolute. Rei. He sprinted for the rooftop door, yanking it open and descending the stairwell 3 steps at a time. The halls, just moments ago filled with the lazy shuffle of departing students, were now a maelstrom of terror. People shoved past him, their faces masks of panic. He moved against the current, a salmon swimming upstream against a river of fear. He found her in the main corridor. Takashi Komuro beside her, his face pale and indecisive. Rei was frozen, her phone clutched in her hand, her eyes locked on the horror unfolding through the glass walls of the entryway. One of them, that's what he already called them in his head, was pressing against the glass, its face a smear of blood, its hands clawing mindlessly. Rei, his voice cut through her paralysis. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror. Before Takashi could even process what was happening, Naruto had her by the arm, pulling her away from the grisly spectacle. Naruto, what's happening? My dad. He's a detective, he said to stay put, that help is coming. Help isn't coming, Naruto said, his voice flat and hard. He didn't have time to be gentle. Those things are cannibals. They get back up after they're down. This isn't something the police can handle. He shoved her behind him as a student, his eyes white and bloodshot, stumbled toward them, a chunk of his neck missing. Takashi finally reacted, grabbing a broom from a janitor's closet. Stay back, he yelled, his voice cracking. He swung the broom wildly. The creature barely flinched, batting the flimsy wood aside and lunging. Naruto moved. It wasn't a panicked swing, it was a precise, calculated motion. He stepped forward, pivoting on his back foot. He brought his right hand up, not in a fist, but as a rigid spear. He struck the creature's throat, the impact echoing with a wet, crunching sound. Its momentum carried it forward, but its legs tangled, and it went down hard. It tried to push itself up, gurgling. Naruto didn't hesitate. He stomped down on its head, once, a sickening crack silencing the gurgles for good. The corridor fell silent for a heartbeat. Takashi stared, the broken broom handle dangling from his hand. Rei looked from the corpse to Naruto, her breath hitched in her throat. He hadn't looked angry, or scared. He had looked professional. We need to move, Naruto stated, his eyes already scanning the hallway. Up. The roof is the only defensible spot for now. More of them were coming, drawn by the noise. Their groans were a rising chorus. As he turned, his eyes swept the chaotic corridor and locked with another pair. Across the hall, near the kendo club's dojo, stood Saeko Busujima. She held a bakken, a wooden training sword, in a two-handed grip. The floor around her was littered with 3 of the creatures, all disabled with clean, precise strikes to the head. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't screaming. Her lavender eyes were narrowed, and a faint, serene smile played on her lips. And she was watching him. She hadn't been watching the creatures she'd dispatched. She had been watching him deal with his. Their gazes met over the carnage, and in that moment, a silent, profound understanding passed between them. He saw a fellow predator, someone who understood the lethal dance. She saw something more, a calm in the storm, a deadliness that was as natural as breathing. He was not just a survivor. He was a weapon. One of the creatures shambled towards him from the side. Before he could react, Saeko was a blur of motion. She flowed through the chaos, her bakken a whistling arc of dark wood. It connected with the creature's temple with a sound like a melon splitting. It dropped without a sound. She came to a stop beside him, her breathing even, her eyes still locked on his. You move well, she said, her voice a low, musical hum. You too, Naruto replied, giving a curt nod. We're going to the roof. You with us. It seems the most logical course of action, she agreed. Her gaze flicking to Rei and Takashi, who were still processing the brutal efficiency of the two of them. She fell into step beside Naruto, her presence a quiet, dangerous counterpoint to his own focused intensity. They moved as one. The journey to the roof was a vertical nightmare. The stairwells were choked with both the living and the dead. Naruto took the lead, using a tall leg he'd ripped from a broken desk as a club. He didn't waste motion. Every strike was to the head, every push designed to create space. He was a force of nature, a battering ram of decisive violence. Saeko moved on his flank. Her bakken a fluid, deadly extension of her arms. Where he was brute force, she was elegant precision. A thrust to an eye socket, a crushing blow to a temple, a crippling G-strike to a knee to send one tumbling back into the throng behind it. They didn't need to communicate. A glance, a slight shift in weight, was all it took. Rei and Takashi scrambled behind them, the IR shock giving way to a desperate will to survive. Takashi tried to help, swinging his broken broom handle, but his attacks were clumsy, hesitant. He was fighting out of fear. Naruto and Saeko were fighting to win. On the third-floor landing, they were nearly overwhelmed. A dozen of them poured from the classrooms, trapping them against the stairs. No way through, Takashi yelled, his back pressed against the wall. We don't go through. We make a path, Naruto said. He glanced at Saeko. I need a 3-second diversion. Keep them off me. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, but she simply nodded. As you wish. She stepped in front of him, her bakken a blur, creating a perimeter of pain that made the creatures hesitate. Naruto's hands flew together in a cross-shaped seal, a gesture so foreign and yet so instinctive it felt like he was born doing it. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With 2 puffs of smoke, 2 perfect duplicates of Naruto appeared on either side of him. They were solid, real. Their eyes holding the same cold fire as his own. Rei gasped. Takashi's jaw dropped. What the hell? Diversion, the real Naruto said, his voice tight with strain. The clones didn't speak. They charged, one to the left, one to the right, drawing the attention of half the horde. They fought with the same brutal efficiency as the original, buying precious seconds. Later, Naruto grunted, shoving Rei and Takashi toward the stairs. Move, now. The sight of the impossible had broken their paralysis. They scrambled up the stairs, Saeko falling back to cover their retreat. She glanced back at Naruto. Her expression a mixture of awe and intense curiosity. This changed everything. He wasn't just a skilled fighter. He was something else entirely. By the time they burst onto the rooftop, the clones had dispersed into smoke. Their job done. Naruto stumbled, leaning against the doorframe, a sheen of sweat on his brow. Using even a small amount of chakra here felt like running a marathon in lead boots. The 5 of them, Naruto, Saeko, Rei, Takashi, and a shell-shocked Kota Hirano, a portly, glasses-wearing boy who'd been hiding in the stairwell and had latched onto their group in desperation, stared out at the city. It was burning. Columns of black smoke rose from a dozen different locations. The constant scream of sirens was now punctuated by the rattle of distant, automatic gunfire. Helicopters swarmed in the sky like panicked insects. They're everywhere, Rei whispered, her voice trembling. The whole city. Takashi rounded on Naruto, his fear finally boiling over into anger. What was that? Back there. The copies of you. Naruto pushed himself upright, his breathing evening out. A special talent. Let's call it a family secret. He wasn't looking at Takashi. He was looking at the adjacent school building, his mind already working on the next problem. It doesn't matter what it was. It worked. We're here. A talent. Takashi scoffed. People don't just hop into existence. He saved our lives, Saeko said, her voice cutting through Takashi's rising hysteria. She hadn't taken her eyes off Naruto. Twice. I, for one, am not inclined to question his methods. Before the argument could escalate, the rooftop door burst open again. A small group stumbled out, led by the buxom, slightly dazed school nurse, Shizuka Marikawa. Behind her was the pink-haired, prodigiously intelligent Saya Takagi, who looked more annoyed than scared. Well, this is a suboptimal situation, Saya declared, pushing her glasses up her nose as she surveyed the burning city. The communications are down, the lower levels are compromised, and the escape routes are statistically impassable. We are, for all intents and purposes, trapped. Naruto ignored her pessimistic analysis. He was watching the stairwell door. It was shuddering. Groans and the scraping of fingernails on metal echoed from within. They know we're up here, Kota whimpered, fumbling with the strap of a large bag. We're trapped. It's game over, man. Shut up, Naruto said, not unkindly. He walked to the edge of the roof, peering across the 10-foot gap to the roof of the faculty building next door. A small observatory was built on its corner, its connecting walkway long since demolished. We're not trapped yet. Saya followed his gaze. The gap is too wide to jump, and the fall is approximately 20 meters. The probability of survival is less than 5%. Not if we make a bridge, Naruto countered. He pointed to a large, rolled-up fire hose in its housing on the wall. Hirano, you're the weapons guy, right? Kota blinked, startled at being addressed. Yeah, I know everything about military-grade hardware, firearms, ballistics. Can you secure that hose to that railing? Naruto asked, pointing. Make it strong enough to hold a person's weight. Kota's panic was instantly replaced by purpose. He unzipped his bag, revealing a modified nail gun powered by a gas canister. Yes, I can. The Hilti GX90WF. Modified for higher pressure and longer fasteners. It can pin steel to concrete. Good. Get to it, Naruto ordered. Takashi, help him. While they worked, the banging on the door grew louder. The metal was starting to buckle. They're coming through, Rei cried out. Saeko took up a position beside the door, her bakken held ready. They will not pass easily. Yuto walked to the other side of the roof, directly opposite the faculty building. He took a deep breath, planting his feet. Everyone get back. They all looked at him. He was staring at the thick concrete parapet that ran along the edge of the roof. What are you doing? Saya demanded. Making an anchor point, he said. He held up his right hand, palm open. A strange, high-pitched whining sound filled the air, like 1,000 angry hornets. A spiraling vortex of brilliant blue energy began to form in his palm, churning and twisting with visible force. The air grew thick, heavy with a pressure that made their teeth ache. The others stared, their minds refusing to comprehend what they were seeing. It was impossible. It was a violation of all known physics. A miniature, controlled hurricane of pure energy, held in the hand of a high school student. Rei's eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and awe. This was not a family secret. This was something divine, or demonic. She felt like she was looking at the sun. Seiko's breath caught in her throat. The serene smile was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated fascination. She had seen him fight like a master. She had seen him create living duplicates from smoke. But this was the power of a god. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was everything she had ever found compelling, concentrated into a single, glowing sphere. The metal door finally burst inwards, and the first of the dead spilled onto the roof, shambling towards Saeko. Naruto's face was a mask of extreme concentration. Veins stood out on his temples. This was taking everything he had. Rasengan, he roared, the name of the technique a guttural, foreign word. He slammed his hand into the concrete wall. There was no explosion. There was only a grinding, pulverizing shriek of tortured matter. The Rasengan didn't break the concrete, it annihilated it. The wall disintegrated into a cloud of dust and gravel, a perfect, meter-wide hole punched clean through it. The force of the impact sent spiderweb cracks racing across the rooftop. The sudden, shocking violence of the act stunned everyone, including the creatures that had just broken through the door. They froze, their mindless hunger momentarily overridden by the sheer spectacle of power. Naruto collapsed to one knee, his right arm hanging limp, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The blue light was gone. A cloud of concrete dust billowed from the hole he had created. He looked up, his eyes finding Rei's first, then Seiko's. He saw their shock, their fear, their awe. The world they knew was gone. The boy they thought they knew was gone with it. In his place was a mystery, a savior, a monster. The hose, he gasped, forcing the words out. Through the hole. Now, the spell was broken. Reality, reshaped and redefined, came crashing back in. The world had died today, but something new, and terrifyingly powerful, had just been born on this rooftop. And they were standing right next to it. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The City of the Dead. The world, for a long, silent moment, consisted only of the hole. It was a perfect, dark circle carved out of the rooftop parapet, a wound in the fabric of their reality. The dust from the pulverized concrete hung in the air like a ghost, catching the dying afternoon light in its motes. The groans of the dead, the distant sirens, the Rei wind itself seemed to have been silenced by the sheer, physics-defying violence of the act. Takashi stared, his mouth agape, his mind trying and failing to connect the quiet, often bullied blonde key D from his class with the being of incandescent power who had just unmade solid stone with his bare hand. Rei clutched her own arms, her knuckles white. She was trembling, not with fear of the dead, but with a primal awe that was far more unsettling. It was the feeling an ancient human might have had witnessing lightning strike a tree for the first time. Only Saeko seemed to truly grasp it. Her eyes, fixed on the kneeling figure of Naruto, were alight with a fierce, burning intensity. It was the look of a master swordsmith discovering a new, legendary steel. He was not just a person. He was an event. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, his right arm dangling uselessly at his side. It felt like he'd plunged it into molten lead. The chakra exhaustion was a physical agony, a deep, cellular ache that throbbed in time with his heart. The hose, he bit out, his voice a harsh rasp. Kota, now. The command jolted Kota Hirano from his stupor. Purpose overrode panic. Yes, right. He scrambled to the fire hose housing. His modified nail gun already in his hands. He fed the heavy canvas hose through the newly created void, the rough material scraping against the broken edges. Takashi, shaken but not broken, moved to help him. His hands clumsy as he tried to secure the brass nozzle. It's not enough. Saya Takagi's sharp voice cut through the haze. She pointed a manicured finger toward the other building. The angle is too steep. We'll need to anchor the other end, but no one can throw it that far or that accurately. The creatures, their momentary pause broken, renewed their advance. Saeko met them, her bakken a dark blur. She wasn't just holding a line, she was a wall. A creature lunged, and she sidestepped, the end of her wooden sword driving up under its jaw with a sickening crack of vertebrae. She spun, the momentum carrying her into a sweeping strike that shattered another's knee, sending it tumbling. She was grace and brutality in one lethal package, buying them the seconds they so desperately needed. Naruto watched her for a fraction of a second, a flicker of profound respect in his eyes. He then turned his attention to the problem. The gap, the hose. He took a deep breath, focusing the last dregs of his energy. He held out his left hand, the fingers trembling with strain. A thin, almost invisible strand of blue energy shot from his fingertips, crossing the sea. Chasm and wrapping itself around a sturdy metal drainpipe on the far building. It looked like a spider's thread, impossibly fragile. What's that? Rei whispered, inching closer to him. Chakra string, he grunted. Sweat beading on his forehead. It's weak, but it'll be enough to guide it. He grabbed the nozzle of the fire hose from Takashi. With a grunt of effort, he hurled it out over the chasm. It flew true, tethered by the glowing thread, and clattered against the far wall before the heavy brass fitting snagged securely in the crook of the drainpipe. Their bridge was made. Go, Naruto yelled, his voice cracking. One at a time. Shizuka-sensei, you first. The buxom nurse looked at the swaying hose, then at the approaching dead, and swallowed hard. With a squeak of fear, she grabbed the hose and began to pull herself across. Hand over hand, her feet dangling over the street below where a sea of grasping hands writhed. Saya went next, her movements surprisingly agile, her face a mask of grim determination. Then Kota, his bulk making the hose sag alarmingly. Then Takashi, who hesitated for a long second, his eyes flicking between Naruto and Rei, before scrambling across. Now it was just the three of them. Naruto, Rei, and Saeko, who was being slowly but surely pushed back. There were too many. Rei, your turn, Naruto said, grabbing a discarded pipe from the floor. His right arm was still a useless weight. But his left was steady. Not without you, she cried, her eyes wide with panic as a creature lunged past Saeko's guard. Naruto intercepted it, swinging the pipe with vicious force into its skull. It crumpled. Don't argue with me, he roared, a flash of the old, commanding fury he hadn't felt in years. Go. Saeko glanced back, her chest heaving. He is right, Miyamoto-san. We will be right behind you. Quote. Tears streamed down Rei's face, but she obeyed. She grabbed the hose, her eyes never leaving Naruto's until she was halfway across. Saeko fell back to stand beside him, her back to his. They were surrounded. The roof was a crawling mass of them. This was a fine mess to get us into, Uzumaki-san, she said, her voice strangely calm, almost cheerful. He managed a grim smile. What, you're not having fun? Oh, I am, she breathed, and he could hear the genuine thrill in her voice. This is clarifying. She dispatched another one with an elegant thrust. Quote, but I do not see a path to that hose for both of us. He didn't answer. He was channeling again. Not for a Rasengan. He'd be lucky to light a candle with what he had left. He focused the energy into his legs. He glanced at the approaching horde, then at her. When I move, you follow. Don't hesitate. Without waiting for a reply, he exploded into motion. He didn't run for the hose. He ran straight at the thickest part of the crowd, using his one good arm and the pipe to carve a path. It was a suicidal, insane maneuver. The creatures, their single-minded focus now entirely on him, swarmed to intercept. It was the opening she needed. Saeko saw it instantly. He wasn't trying to save himself. He was pulling the entire enemy force onto him, creating a clear, unimpeded path for her. It was the most selfless, tactically brilliant, and utterly reckless thing she had ever seen. For a split second, her heart clenched with a feeling she couldn't name. Then, her training took over. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted for the hose, grabbing it and swinging out over the abyss just as Naruto, his diversion complete, pivoted and made a desperate, chakra-enhanced leap for the dangling end of the hose, grabbing it with his one good hand. The jolt nearly tore his arm from its socket. He dangled precariously, his body swinging like a pendulum as Saeko scrambled the rest of the way across. The creatures crowded the hole he'd made, their groans of frustration a horrifying chorus from below. Takashi and Kota grabbed Saeko, pulling her onto the safety of the roof. Then they all reached for Naruto. He hung limp, the last of his strength gone. They hauled him up, his body in dead weight, and dragged him away from the edge. He lay on his back, gasping, the world a gray, spinning blur. He could feel hands on him, hear voices. But they were distant, muffled. He saw Rei's tear-streaked face swim into his vision. Then Saeko's, her expression unreadable, her lavender eyes boring into him. His arm. Shizuka-sensei's voice was shaky but professional. It looks dislocated. And the strain, I've never seen anything like it. Naruto closed his eyes. The pain was secondary. The exhaustion was absolute. He had saved them. For now. But the cost was steep. In this world, his power was a finite, precious resource, and he had just spent nearly all of it. The inside of the microbus was a cramped, stinky bubble of fragile safety in a world gone mad. Shizuka Marikawa drove with a lead foot, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her usual airy demeanor replaced by a focused terror. The city unfolded, dead around them in a panorama of destruction. Cars were overturned and burning. Bodies, both inert and moving, littered the streets. A JSDF light armored vehicle lay on its side, smoke pouring from its engine. The asphalt around it swarming with the dead feasting on its fallen crew. Naruto sat near the back, his head leaning against the vibrating window. Shizuka, with Rei's help, had managed to pee his shoulder back into its socket, an agonizing process he'd endured with little more than a string of guttural curses, and had wrapped his arm in a makeshift sling. The throbbing was a dull, constant reminder of his limits. He watched the city burn, his expression grim. This was worse than Pain's assault on Konoha. That had been destruction with a purpose. This was just decay. A mindless, unraveling plague. Across from him, Saeko was meticulously cleaning her bakken with a cloth she'd found, her movements precise and calming. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd gotten on the bus, but he I'd feel her eyes on him from time to time, analytical and probing. Rei sat beside him, so close their shoulders were touching. She hadn't left his side. She was his self-appointed guardian, her fierce loyalty a tangible thing. In the front, Takashi sat beside Shizuka, his posture stiff, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes would find Rei beside Naruto, and his jaw would tighten. Saya Takagi, meanwhile, had commandeered a smartphone from a dead salaryman and was trying to find a working signal, her muttering a constant stream of technical jargon and frustrated insults. Useless infrastructure. Complete societal collapse in less than 3 hours. Pathetic. And Kota Hirano. Kota was in heaven. He had found a vantage point at a side window. His nail gun resting on his lap like a beloved pet. Tango at 2 o'clock. Cluster of 5. No, 6. Oh, look, that one's still got its tie on. Classic Romero-style shambler. The relative quiet was broken when they were forced to stop. A pile-up of cars and a city bus blocked the entire street. We'll have to find another way around, Shizuka said, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a man in a teacher's uniform banged on the driver's side door, his face a mask of desperate relief. It was Koichi Shido, the smug, manipulative history teacher. Behind him was a small, terrified flock of about 10 students. Thank God. Open up. Let us in, Shido yelled, his voice oozing a false sincerity. Shizuka, her instincts screaming at her to help, made a move to open the door. Don't, Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying the length of the bus. Everyone looked at him. Shizuka froze, her hand hovering over the lock. Naruto-kun, they're survivors. She protested. We can't just leave them. Look at them, Naruto said, his gaze cold. They aren't armed. They aren't alert. They're just following him. He's a liability. He's a teacher. We have to respect. Takashi started, but was cut off. Respect is earned, Naruto countered flatly, and in this world, it's earned by keeping people alive. He's not a leader. He's a shepherd leading sheep to a slaughterhouse he doesn't have the key for. Shido, seeing their hesitation, changed tactics. He pointed a finger at Naruto. You, the delinquent, Uzumaki. I am a faculty member of this academy. I am in command here. Open this door immediately, or you will face severe disciplinary action. Saya snorted. Disciplinary action? From whom? The zombie school board. Naruto ignored him. He looked at Shizuka. Drive. Go around them. Use the sidewalk if you have to. We can't just abandon them. Rei said, her voice pleading. She was torn between her innate compassion and her newfound trust in Naruto's judgment. Naruto's gaze softened as he looked at her. We're not abandoning them. We're giving them a choice. He raised his voice, projecting it through the glass. Shido, the bus is full. You want a ride, you find your own. We're moving in 30 seconds. He was bluffing. The bus could hold more. But he was testing Shido, and more importantly, the students with him. Shido's face contorted in rage. Insolent brat. You will regret this. He turned to his followers. You see, the weak and selfish hoard what they have. True strength is in unity. Under my guidance, we will not only survive, we will prosper. We will build a new world. It was a practiced, hollow speech. A few of the students looked uncertain, their eyes darting from Shido's pompous declaration to the grim, practical reality of the bus. 15 seconds, Naruto called out. One of the students, a girl with glasses, broke away from Shido's group and ran to the bus door, banging on it frantically. Please. He's crazy. Let me in. Naruto nodded to Takashi. Let her in. Takashi, seeing the logic now, quickly unlocked the door. The girl scrambled inside, sobbing with relief. Her defection caused a chain reaction. 3 more students broke ranks and sprinted for the bus, leaving Shido with a dwindling, terrified flock. Naruto let them all in. They crammed into the aisle, their gratitude palpable. Shido was left standing there, his face purple with fury and humiliation. He screamed impotent threats as Shizuka, following Naruto's nod, mounted the curb and expertly maneuvered the bus around the pile-up, leaving the history teacher and his last EU loyalists behind in the ruined street. The tension in the bus slowly dissipated. Naruto had faced down a human threat not with power, but with authority. He hadn't thrown a punch or used a shred of chakra. He had simply exposed a false leader and offered a better, more honest alternative. In doing so, he had cemented his position. No one questioned who was in charge now. They drove for another hour. The fuel gauge dropping dangerously low. They needed supplies, and they needed a break from the claustrophobic confines of the bus. Naruto spotted a large, roadside supermarket with an almost empty parking lot. "There," he said, pointing. "Pull in. We'll scavenge for food, water, and fuel if we can." Shizuka parked the bus near the entrance, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the distant, ever-present groans of the dead. "All right, listen up," Naruto said, getting to his feet. The new students looked at him with rapt attention. "No one goes in alone. We move in groups. Kota, you're with me and Saeko. We'll clear the building. Takashi, you take Rei and 2 others, search for food and water. Saya, you're the smartest person here. You and Shizuka-sensei, figure out how to siphon gas from these cars. The rest of you, stay in the bus, keep the doors locked, and scream if you see anything get within 20 feet. Clear." A chorus of, "Yes," answered him. It was crisp. It was disciplined. He grabbed the metal pipe he'd used on the roof. Saeko stood, her bakken held loosely in one hand. Their eyes met. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she replied. The supermarket was eerily silent. The automatic doors were open, and the inside was dark, the power out. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows down the aisles. It was a perfect ambush site. Naruto and Saeko moved like shadows, their footsteps silent on the linoleum floor. Kota followed, his nail gun held at the ready, his initial excitement replaced by a professional tension. They swept the entrance, then moved aisle by aisle. Naruto used his senses, honed by a lifetime of hiding from and hunting shinobi. He could hear the faint, wet scrape of a foot dragging 3 aisles over. He could smell the coppery scent of old blood near the deli counter. They found a few. A cashier slumped over her register, a janitor in a storeroom. Each was dispatched with quiet, ruthless efficiency. Naruto would pin them or create an opening, and Saeko would deliver the final, precise blow. They were a terrifyingly effective team. After clearing the main floor, they headed for the back offices. It was there, in a small, cramped break room, that Saeko finally spoke. They were alone. Kota was guarding the door. "Your arm," she said, her voice low. "The technique you used on the roof. It nearly crippled you." He flexed the fingers of his left hand, his right still in the sling. "It takes a toll. This world, it doesn't have the same energy. It's like trying to breathe underwater." She leaned against a vending machine, her gaze unwavering. "The copies. The ball of light. You are not from here, are you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Naruto was silent for a moment, studying her. He could lie. He could deflect. But looking into her eyes, he saw a profound, unsettling honesty. She wasn't looking for an advantage. She was looking for the truth. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not." She nodded slowly, as if he had just confirmed a complex equation. She pushed off the vending machine and took a step closer. The air between them grew thick. "When I was younger," she began, her voice dropping even lower. Her eyes becoming distant, "a man tried to assault me. On my way home, I had my bakken. I let him get close. And then I broke his collarbone, his femur, and 3 of his ribs. I crippled him." Naruto listened, his expression unreadable. "The police called it self-defense," she continued, her gaze turning inward. "But it wasn't. Not entirely. When I felt his bone break under my strike, when I saw the look of terror in his eyes, I felt a thrill. A part of me, a deep, dark part, enjoyed it. It enjoyed the dominance, the power of life and death. I have spent years trying to control it, to pretend it doesn't exist. But today, killing them, a part of me feels alive for the first time in a long time." She finished her confession, her eyes finally locking back onto his. She was expecting disgust, fear, judgment. It was the confession of a monster. Naruto was silent for a long count. He thought of his first kill. He thought of the bloodlust of the 9 tails. He thought of the cold necessity of the battlefield. He looked at this beautiful, dangerous girl who was laying her soul bare, and he didn't see a monster. He saw a soldier. There's a clarity in a real fight, isn't there? He said, his voice soft. When it's you or them, everything else just fades away. All the noise, all the rules, all the expectations. There's only the moment, and the choice. To live or to die. To kill or be killed. He took a step closer, until they were barely a foot apart. That part of you that feels alive. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't try to kill it. It's what's keeping you alive right now. It's what's keeping them alive. He nodded toward the front of the store. You just have to be the one to control it. Don't ever let it control you. A single tear traced a path down Saeko's cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound, earth-shattering relief. In his words, she hadn't found condemnation. She had found absolution. He didn't just accept her darkness, he understood it. He validated it. She reached out, her hand hesitating for a moment before she gently touched the side of his face, her thumb brushing over the faint whisker marks. Thank you, she whispered. The words freighted with a universe of meaning. The bond that had been forged in a glance over a bloody corridor was now sealed in steel. Their moment was shattered by a scream from outside, followed by the percussive thump 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 of Kota's nail gun. They were out of the break room in a second, moving as one. The other groups were retreating to the bus, but the way was blocked. A new type of creature stood in the parking lot. It was taller than the others, leaner. Its movements weren't the shambling gait of the dead, but the fluid, predatory crouch of a hunter. Its eyes glowed with a faint, malevolent red light, and it was actively directing the other creatures, hurting them, using them as a screen. On its forehead, barely visible in the fading light, was a small, dark marking, like a single, comma-shaped tomo, an alpha. It saw Naruto and Saeko exit the store and its head snapped in their direction, letting out a piercing shriek that was not mindless, but a clear, tactical command. A dozen of the normal infected charged them. The bridge, Naruto muttered, a cold knot forming in his stomach. This thing was intelligent. The group was pinned down behind a car, with Rei trying to drag a student who'd twisted his ankle. The alpha ignored the others. It was moving toward the bus, toward the most vulnerable. Saeko, Kota, cover them. Get them to the bus. Naruto yelled, already sprinting. He was running on fumes, his body screaming in protest. His taijutsu, fast as it was, barely kept the alpha at bay. The creature was faster, stronger, and it fought with a crude but effective intelligence. Swiping with claws that tore through the air, it dodged his pipe swing and lashed out, catching him across the chest, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. Naruto stumbled back, hissing in pain. He was too slow. He was too tired. He wasn't going to win. Not like this. He saw the alpha turn its attention to the bus, where Rei was trying to help Shizuka barricade the door. It was going to slaughter them all. No. The word was a silent roar in his mind. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world. He reached deep, past the exhaustion, past the pain, into the very core of his being. He didn't search for Kurama's roaring furnace, that connection was a distant echo here. He searched for the world itself. For the life force in the dying grass, the wilting trees, the very air. He pulled on it, drawing the natural energy into himself. It was a trickle, not the flood he was used to, but it was enough. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer just blue. An orange pigment, like eyeshadow, framed them. The pupils had become horizontal bars, the eyes of a toad sage. Power, raw and primal, flooded his system. The pain vanished, replaced by a thrumming, vibrant energy. The alpha froze, its head cocked, its primitive intelligence recognizing a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. It saw a predator become an apex. Naruto didn't waste the moment. He moved. The world seemed to slow down. He crossed the distance between them in a single, blurry step. The alpha swiped, but he was no longer there. He was behind it. He didn't use a jutsu. He didn't need one. He drove his left fist, now charged with sage energy, into the creature's spine. The sound was like a tree trunk snapping. The alpha's body convulsed, and it was thrown a dozen feet, crashing into the side of a car with enough force to buckle the metal. It lay there, twitching, the red light in its eyes fading to black. The effect was instantaneous. The other creatures, their guiding intelligence gone, reverted to their mindless shambling. Saeko and Kota, taking advantage of the confusion, cut a path for the others, herding them onto the bus. The moment the last person was on board, the power fled Naruto's body. The Sage mode faded, and the backlash hit him like a physical blow. The world crashed back in at full speed. The exhaustion returned, tenfold. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees, gasping, his vision tunneling. The bus door hissed open. He felt arms around him, pulling him up. It was Rei and Saeko, one on each side, their combined strength barely enough to haul his dead weight onto the bus. The door closed, shutting out the world. He collapsed onto a seat, his head lolling back. Rei was there in an instant, a first aid kit in her hands, her face pale with worry. "You're hurt," she whispered, dabbing at the claw marks on his chest with an antiseptic wipe. He flinched, the sting sharp and real. He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her hair was a mess, her face was smudged with dirt. But her eyes were clear and focused entirely on him. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice trembling as she worked. When it went for the bus, I thought we were all going to die." He reached up with his good hand, his fingers brushing her cheek. His voice was hoarse. "I won't let anything happen to you." It wasn't a promise born of bravado. It was a statement of absolute fact. A fundamental law of his new, broken universe. In the quiet of the bus, surrounded by the sleeping and the wounded, with the horrors of the dead city outside, that simple deck. Laration was the most powerful thing she had ever heard. She leaned into his touch for a moment, closing her eyes, finding a single, unshakable point of stillness in the heart of the storm. A short distance away, Saeko watched them, her hand resting on the hilt of her bakken. She was not jealous. She was observing. She had found her validation. Rei was finding her safety. And both, she realized, were anchored to the same impossible. Exhausted boy who had stared into the abyss and forced it to blink. The dynamics had shifted forever. They were no longer just a group of survivors. They were his. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sanctuary of Thorns. The journey to the Takagi estate was a descent into a quieter, more insidious kind of hell. They left the burning urban sprawl of Tokanasu City behind. The screams and sirens fading into a persistent, low-level hum of dread that seemed to emanate from the world itself. The highways were littered with the abandoned chariots of a fallen civilization. Cars sat empty, doors ajar, their interiors sometimes telling a story of a quick, violent end. Here and there, a lone shambler would wander aimlessly across the asphalt, a ghost at the feast. Inside the bus, a new, fragile ecosystem had formed, with Naruto at its center. He was a quiet, gravitational force. He sat near the back, his injured arm in a better sling fashioned by Shizuka, his eyes closed but his senses perpetually alert. The effort of the brief sage mode had left a deep, resonant exhaustion that clung to him like a shroud. He needed rest, but real rest was a luxury this new world did not afford. Rei remained his shadow. She had cleaned the claw marks on his chest and bandaged them with a fierce, protective tenderness. Now, she sat beside him, a spear she'd scavenged, a broom handle with a kitchen knife brutally duct-taped to the end, held upright between her knees. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a sentry. Her gaze would flicker from the windows to Naruto, a silent, unwavering watch. Saeko, on the other hand, gave him space. She sat across the aisle, polishing the blade of a high-quality chef's knife she'd liberated from the supermarket. Her movements were meditative, but her eyes were sharp. She observed the interactions, the shifting power dynamics. She watched Takashi, who had retreated into a sullen silence in the front of the bus, his knuckles wide. Where he gripped his own makeshift weapon. He would glance back, his eyes full of a confused mixture of resentment and begrudging respect for Naruto, and an aching jealousy for Rei's undivided attention. He was a king who had lost his kingdom and didn't understand how. It was Saya Takagi who had given them their destination. After 2 hours of fruitless driving, she had finally thrown down her scavenged phone in disgust. "This is pointless," she'd announced to the bus at large. "We are a ship without a rudder. We have no destination, insufficient fuel, and finite supplies. Statistically, this is a prelude to extinction. Do you have a better idea, genius?" Takashi had snapped from the front seat. "As a matter of fact, I do," she'd retorted, pushing her glasses up her nose with an air of theatrical superiority. "My home. It's located on the outskirts of the city. My father is Suichiro Takagi, a man of significant influence. Our estate is walled, secure, and equipped with its own power generation and communication systems. It is, by any logical metric, the single most defensible location in this prefecture. And so, they drove. Saya navigated, her sharp, precise directions a stark contrast to the chaos outside. As they drew closer, the signs of societal collapse lessened. The roads were clearer. The distant fires were gone. It was as if they were entering a different country. Finally, they saw it. A massive, 10-foot-high concrete wall topped with electrified wire, stretching as far as the eye could see. A single, reinforced steel gate blocked the road, watched over by a camera mounted on a steel pole. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress. Saya strode to the front of the bus. "Stop here," she commanded Shizuka. She then leaned out the window, looking directly into the camera lens. "It's me, you idiots. Open the gate." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a metallic voice crackled from a hidden speaker. "Identity confirmed, Saya Ajo-sama. Stand by." With a heavy, grinding groan, the massive gate began to slide open, revealing a pristine, manicured driveway that wound its way through a small forest of perfectly sculpted trees. On either side of the gate, men in black suits and tactical vests, armed with assault rifles, stood at attention. They were not police. They were private security. As the bus rolled through, the men's eyes were not on Saya. They were on the battered, blood-streaked bus, on the haggard faces in the windows, and most of all, on the blonde-haired boy with the whisker marks who met their gaze with an unnerving, ancient calm. The bus pulled to a stop in front of a sprawling, traditional-style mansion that blended old-world Japanese architecture with imposing modern security features. The doors slid open, and Saya stepped out as if she were returning from a school trip, not the apocalypse. A man and a woman stood waiting on the porch. The man, Suichiro Takagi, was tall and imposing, with the same sharp intelligence in his eyes as his daughter, but colder. Harder. He wore an expensive yukata and projected an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. The woman beside him, Yuriko Takagi, was beautiful and elegant, her serene smile a mask that concealed a mind just as sharp and calculating as her husband's. "Saya," Suichiro said, his voice a low baritone. "You are unharmed." It was a statement, not a question. "Of course I am, father," Saya replied, though a hint of relief leaked into her tone. "I am your daughter." Suichiro's gaze swept over the disheveled group that trickled out of the bus behind her. He assessed them in a heartbeat. The dazed nurse, the sullen boy with the bat, the intense girl with the wooden sword, the weapon-obsessed otaku, the terrified transfer students. And then his eyes landed on Naruto. He lingered there, his gaze narrowing almost imperceptibly. He saw the sling, the exhaustion, the quiet authority the boy radiated. He saw a piece on the board that did not belong. "You have brought guests," Suichiro observed, his tone neutral. "They are my companions," Saya corrected him. "We survived the outbreak at the academy together." She gestured to Naruto. "He is the reason we survived." The statement hung in the air. Suichiro's eyes bored into Naruto, a silent appraisal taking place. It was not the grateful look of a father whose child was saved. It was the look of a master strategist evaluating a new, unknown weapon. "I see," he said slowly. "Yuriko, have our guests shown to rooms. See that they are fed and can bathe. They have endured an ordeal." He looked directly at Naruto. "You, the leader, you will join me in my study. We have much to discuss." It was not a request. The study was a room of quiet, oppressive power. One wall was a single pane of armored glass overlooking a meticulously raked Zen garden. The other walls were lined with bookshelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes on history, philosophy, and military strategy. A massive, polished, mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. Suichiro Takagi sat behind it, his hands steepled, his eyes like chips of obsidian. Naruto stood in the center of the room, refusing the offered chair. He was grimy, exhausted, and wearing a blood-stained school uniform, but he met the older man's gaze without an ounce of intimidation. It was a silent battle of wills, a clash of two very different kinds of power. "My daughter tells me you are responsible for her survival," Suichiro began, his voice smooth as silk. We all played a part, Naruto replied, his voice flat. A modest answer, but my sources suggest otherwise, Suichiro said, gesturing to a sleek, high-tech monitor built into his desk. He tapped a key, and an image flickered to life. It was grainy, high-altitude satellite footage, time-stamped from the previous day. It showed the rooftop of Fujimi Academy. It showed a figure slamming a ball of brilliant light into a concrete wall. The image was blurry, but the burst of energy was unmistakable. The government is in chaos, Suichiro continued, his eyes never leaving Naruto's face. But certain factions are still operational. They are very interested in this light show. They are calling it an anomalous existential threat. They are forming a special unit to hunt down its source. A unit with a blank check and no oversight. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. They are hunting you, boy. Naruto's expression didn't change. Let them come. A flicker of surprise, or perhaps respect, crossed Suichiro's face. A bold response, but foolish. You cannot fight a modern military. Not alone. He leaned back in his chair. However, you are under my roof now. The Takagi name carries weight. I can offer you protection. Sanctuary. And what's the price? Naruto asked, cutting to the heart of it. Suichiro smiled, a cold, predatory thing. Price. There is no price. There is only a mutually beneficial arrangement. You possess a unique and valuable skill set. I possess resources, influence, and a fortress to weather this storm. I am a patriot. I intend to preserve a piece of Japan, to rebuild. Your power, properly managed and directed, would be an invaluable asset in that endeavor. The offer was clear. Become my weapon. Become my dog. I will give you a gilded cage, and in return, you will be my sword. Naruto thought of his life in Konoha. He had been a weapon for his village. He had fought and bled and nearly died for it, over and over. He had been their hero, their pariah, their Jinchuriki. He had never truly been his own man. Not until the very end. He looked at Suichiro, at the man's casual, arrogant assumption of command, and a cold, hard resolve settled in his heart. Never again. I'm not an asset, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm not a tool to be managed. I'm the one who keeps my people safe. That's all. Suichiro's smile tightened. The mask of civility was slipping. Your people, a handful of terrified children. They are safe here because of me. Because of these walls. Do not mistake a lucky streak for a strategy. Outside these walls is only death. Here, there is a future. My future. You can be a part of it, or you can be a memory. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. He was a prisoner here, whether he knew it or not. Naruto let the silence stretch. He let the man's threat hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then, he raised his left hand. A soft, whining sound filled the room. A perfect, swirling sphere of blue chakra, smaller than the one on the roof but no less potent, spun to life in his palm. The Rasengan. The air crackled with its power. Suichiro froze. His eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of genuine fear. The raw, untamable energy churning in Naruto's hand was something outside his understanding. A power that did not obey the rules of wealth or influence. Naruto didn't look at Suichiro. His gaze was fixed on a priceless, antique porcelain vase that sat on a pedestal near the window. It was clearly the man's most prized possession. He held the Rasengan just inches from it. The energy coming off the sphere made the delicate porcelain vibrate. These walls are strong, Naruto said, his voice a low, steady murmur. But they're not as strong as this. Your safety, your fortress, your future, it all exists because I allow it to. You think I'm your asset. You think you're in control here. He finally turned his gaze back to Suichiro, and his blue eyes were as cold and unforgiving as the void between stars. You're mistaken. He held the pose for a long, terrifying moment. The silent promise of annihilation hanging in the air. Then, as slowly as he had formed it, he let the Rasengan dissipate, the energy fading into nothing. He turned and walked toward the door. We'll be leaving in the morning. Thank you for your hospitality. He left Suichiro Takagi sitting in his opulent study, surrounded by the trappings of his power, utterly and completely checkmated. For the first time in his life, the man had encountered a force he could not buy, intimidate, or control. The hot water was a miracle. Naruto stood under the spray of a luxurious shower, his good arm braced against the tiled wall, letting the heat soak into his aching muscles. The Takagi estate had guest rooms that were nicer than any apartment he'd ever lived in this life or the last. It was a golden cage, and he could already feel its bars closing in. When he emerged from the bathroom, a towel slung around his waist, he found Saeko sitting on the edge of his bed. She was dressed in a simple cotton yukata provided by their hosts, her damp hair clinging to her neck. She was holding her bakken, resting it across her lap. "I was beginning to wonder if you had drowned in there," she said, her tone light, but her eyes serious. "Tempting," he replied, grabbing a fresh set of clothes, a plain black t-shirt and cargo pants, also provided. He turned his back to her to dress, unconcerned. The casual intimacy felt natural, earned. "You met with him," she said. "Saya's father." "I did. And he wants a new dog," Naruto said, pulling the shirt over his head. "A guard dog with a special trick. He's not interested in survivors. He's interested in assets." Seiko's fingers tightened on her bakken. "I suspected as much. Men like him see the world as a balance sheet. People are either credits or debits." She looked up at him. "What did you tell him?" "I told him we're leaving in the morning." A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It was a stunning sight. "Good. This place, it is safe. But it is the safety of a tomb. It is quiet, and clean, and there is no life here." She stood up and walked toward him, stopping just before him. "Out there, it's a world of teeth and claws. But it is also a world of choice. I prefer that." She reached out and, with a surprising gentleness, adjusted the collar of his shirt. Her fingers brushed against his neck, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him stronger than any static shock. "You need to rest. Real rest. The kind you can only get when you know someone is watching your back." He met her gaze. The understanding that had passé between them on the bloody school corridor, the validation she had found in the break room, it had all coalesced into this. A deep, unwavering loyalty. A partnership forged in fire and truth. "I know," he said softly. Before she could reply, the door slid open. Rei stood there, also in a fresh yukata, her hair still damp. She stopped short, seeing Saeko standing so close to Naruto. A flicker of something, uncertainty, a hint of jealousy, crossed her face. "Oh," she said, "am I interrupting something?" "No," Saeko said smoothly, taking a step back from Naruto, giving them space. "Uzumaki-san and I were just discussing our travel plans." She gave Naruto a meaningful look, then bowed her head slightly to Rei. "Miyamoto-san, good night." She slipped out of the room, silent as a cat. Rei watched her go, a frown tugging at her lips. She then turned her attention to Naruto, her expression softening into concern. "Is your arm okay? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, Rei," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. The exhaustion was beginning to win, pulling at his limbs, making them feel heavy. "Just tired." She hesitated in the doorway, then came in, sliding the door shut behind her. She sat next to him, close, but not touching. "I heard you're taking us away from here. Takashi is furious. He says you're insane, that this is the safest place on Earth." "It's the safest place to die slowly," Naruto countered, his voice rough with fatigue. "We stay here, we become Takagi's private army. We lose the freedom to choose. To fight for ourselves." Rei was quiet for a moment, her hands twisting in her lap. When we were on the bus," she began, her voice small, "you said you wouldn't let anything happen to me." He turned his head to look at her. "I meant it." "I know," she whispered. "It's just, before all this, I was with Hisashi, and then I was supposed to be with Takashi. It was all expected. It was the path everyone thought I should be on." She finally looked up, her brown eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never felt safe. Not really. I felt managed. But with you," she trailed off, searching for the words. "Even when the world is ending, and we're seconds from being eaten alive, I feel steady. Because you're there, and you're not trying to manage me. You're just protecting me." He saw the raw, desperate honesty in her eyes. This wasn't the flighty, drama-prone girl he'd known in class. This was someone being forged into steel by the apocalypse, her core of strength finally showing through. He felt a powerful, protective surge, something deeper and more potent than simple responsibility. He reached out his good hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Rei," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "The old world is gone. All those paths, all those expectations, they burned with it. We get to choose our own path now." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. The simple, warm contact was an anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. It was a promise of stability, of security, of a future that wasn't dictated by anyone else. It was everything she hadn't known she was looking for. He felt a sudden, intense urge to do more, to close the distance between them. But at the same time, he thought of Saeko's fierce loyalty, her warrior's spirit that called to his own. The two feelings were not contradictory. They were just different. Two distinct, powerful connections forming in the ruins of the world. It was confusing, and new, and he was too damn tired to parse it. So he just held her there for a moment, offering silent comfort. It was enough. The next morning, they gathered at the bus. Their ranks were thinner. The students Naruto had rescued from Shido had chosen to stay. The allure of high walls, hot food, and the illusion of a return to normalcy was too strong. Naruto didn't blame them. Only his core group remained. Rei, Saeko, Takashi, Kota, Saya, and Shizuka. Takashi was still angry. "This is a mistake, Naruto. A huge mistake. We're throwing away our only chance." "It's his chance, not ours," Naruto said simply, nodding toward the main house. Saya, surprisingly, sided with him. She stood with her arms crossed, a look of grim resolve on her face. "My father sees people as tools. He always has. He would have used you until you broke, then discarded you. Your logic, while reckless, is sound. A gilded cage is still a cage." She looked at Naruto. "And I'd rather place my bet on an anomaly that can break concrete than on a politician who thinks he can bargain with the end of the world." As they prepared to board the bus, Suichiro and Yuriko Takagi appeared on the porch. Suichiro's face was a stony mask, but Yuriko offered them a serene, knowing smile. "A bold choice," Suichiro called out, his voice echoing in the morning stillness. "The world outside these walls will chew you up and spit you out. When it does, do not come crawling back. This gate will not open for you again." Naruto paused at the door of the bus and looked back at him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Don't worry," he said, his voice carrying with absolute clarity. "We won't." He stepped onto the bus. The doors hissed shut, sealing them inside their small, mobile world once more. As Shizuka pulled away from the opulent mansion, driving back toward the broken world, Naruto felt it. A sense of liberation, a sense of purpose. They weren't running from the dead anymore. They were running toward a future they would build for themselves, a future free of cages, gilded or otherwise. As they passed through the gate, none of them noticed the small, unmarked black van parked half a kilometer down the road, tucked behind a stand of trees. Inside, a man, in tactical gear lowered a pair of high-powered binoculars. He tapped his earpiece. "Target is on the move," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Mobile unit designation, Oni-1, is now active. We have visual confirmation of the anomaly. All assets are green lit. Begin pursuit." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Hunters and Prey. The freedom lasted for 17 miles. It was a fragile, fleeting thing. Tasted in the clean air rushing through the open bus windows and the shared, silent understanding that they had chosen the perilous road over the comfortable prison. They were heading south, toward the coast. Based on a half-baked theory from Saya that naval bases might be more secure, more isolated. It was a goal, and a goal was better than aimless wandering. Naruto sat near the middle of the bus, his back against the side, which allowed him to watch both the road ahead and the faces of his companions. The rest had done him good. The deep, cellular ache from the sage mode had receded to a dull throb, and his arm, while still tender, was functional. He was methodically disassembling and cleaning the nail gun for Kota, his fingers moving with an ingrained, mechanical grace. It was a meditative task, something to occupy his hands while his mind worked. Rei was trying to teach Shizuka the basics of spear fighting in the aisle, a comical and slightly dangerous endeavor that Akazuna LLY earned a yelp from the nurse and a sharp rebuke from Saya. Saeko was in the back, her eyes closed, seemingly asleep, but Naruto knew better. She was conserving energy, her senses extended, a coil. D-spring waiting for the slightest disturbance. Takashi, still simmering with resentment, had taken to staring out the window, his jaw set, a silent dissenter in their fledgling tribe. The first sign of trouble was not a sight or a sound, but a feeling. A subtle, unpleasant pressure built in the air, making the hairs on Naruto's arms stand up. It was a faint, high-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate in his bones. He paused in his cleaning of the nail gun, his head tilting. "What is it?" Rei asked, noticing his sudden stillness. "I don't know," he murmured, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the empty road behind them. "Something's wrong." Seiko's eyes snapped open. She had felt it too. A dissonance in the world. The hum grew louder, resolving into the distinct, thrumming beat of helicopter rotors. But it was a sound unlike the news choppers or military transports they'd seen over the city. It was sharper, faster, more predatory. 3 sleek, black helicopters, devoid of any markings, crested a hill behind them. Moving with terrifying speed and precision. They weren't JSDF. They were something else. Hostiles. Kota yelled, his face pressed against the back window. "Unmarked. Likely special forces. They're closing fast." Simultaneously, 2 black armored vans, the same model they hadn't seen leaving the Takagi estate, peeled out from a side road ahead of them, blocking their path. Men in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by visored helmets, disembarked with practiced efficiency. They carried strange, futuristic-looking rifles, and several of them began deploying OD-mounted devices that began to emit a low, visible thrum of energy. "They're boxing us in," Saya shouted, her usual detached annoyance replaced by genuine alarm. The pressure in the air intensified tenfold as the devices powered up. Naruto felt it like a physical blow. The chakra inside him, the familiar, warm ocean of energy he had always known, suddenly felt thick, sluggish, and cold, like mud. He tried to mold it, to gather even a spark, and the effort sent a spike of searing pain through his head. "What is this?" he grunted, stumbling as he stood up, one hand pressed to his temple. "A suppression field," Saya deduced, her eyes wide with horrified realization as she looked at the devices. "It's projecting a frequency. It must be designed to interfere with whatever it is you do. It's targeting you specifically." The Oni Guard had arrived. Suichiro's parting gift. A hunter-killer team armed with technology specifically designed to neutralize him. "Shizuka, turn," Naruto roared, fighting through the pain. "Off-road, now." The nurse, bless her panicked heart, obeyed instantly. She cranked the wheel, and the microbus lurched off the pavement, bouncing violently as it plowed through a fence and into a dense forest. Branches scraped and screeched against the metal sides. Inside, they were thrown about like dice in a cup. The helicopters were right above them, their rotor wash buffeting the bus. One of them lowered a soldier on a winch. He landed on the roof with a heavy thud. "They're on the roof," Takashi yelled. Before anyone could react, the soldier used a magnetic charge to blow a hole in the roof. He dropped inside, his rifle aimed directly at Naruto. Naruto, his chakra locked down and his body fighting waves of nausea from the suppression field, was at a disadvantage for the first time. He was just a strong man with one good arm. But he wasn't alone. Saeko moved. She was a blur of motion, her bakken swinging up from the floor in a vicious arc that shattered the soldier's wrist before he could pull the trigger. He cried out in pain, his rifle clattering to the floor. Rei was right behind her, thrusting with her makeshift spear. The soldier, caught off guard, took the sharpened kitchen knife in his thigh. He stumbled back, howling, just as Takashi, his resentment forgotten in the face of a common enemy, smashed his metal bat into the man's helmeted head. The soldier crumpled to the floor, unconscious. It was a perfect, 3-part coordinated attack. Messy, brutal, but effective. Naruto looked from Seiko's lethal precision to Rei's desperate courage to Takashi's raw fury. A fierce pride swelled in his chest. They weren't sheep. They were a pack. "Kota, the rifle," Naruto ordered. Kota snatched up the strange weapon, his eyes gleaming with professional curiosity. FN Hurstel derivative chassis, but the power source is unconventional. No magazine. It's energy-based. Can you use it? Can a fish swim? Kota grinned, checking the power cell. Another soldier began to rappel down. Kota didn't hesitate. He aimed and fired. A bolt of crackling blue energy, not unlike a Chidori, erupted from the barrel and struck the soldier midair. He-Man convulsed and went limp on his line, neutralized but not killed. Non-lethal discharge. Fascinating, Kota chirped. Less fascination, more shooting. Saya screeched as the bus crashed through the undergrowth. The battle turned into a chaotic, running fight through the forest. The bus was a tank, with Shizuka at the helm driving like a woman possessed. The Oni Guard were relentless, their vans flanking them through the trees where they could, their soldiers trying to board. It was a brutal ballet of violence. Kota provided covering fire from a blown-out window. Saeko and Takashi became a mobile defense unit, repelling boarders with savage efficiency. Rei, her fear replaced by a cold fire, stood guard over Naruto, her spear ready to intercept anyone who got too close. Naruto, for his part, was a commander. Unable to use his powers, he used his mind. His tactical acumen, honed over 1,000 battles in another life, was his greatest weapon. Hard right, Shizuka, use that ravine as cover. Takashi, Saeko, they're coming from the left. Force them into a bottleneck at the door. Saya, how do we shut down that field? I don't know, she yelled back over the chaos, furiously. Examining the captured soldiers' equipment. The emitters are networked. We'd have to take them all out at once, or find the primary command unit. The chase was taking its toll. The bus was battered, its tires threatening to give out. They were running out of forest, a wide river appearing through the trees ahead. On the riverbank stood a large, imposing structure, a hydroelectric dam. A plan, desperate and wildly dangerous, formed in Naruto's mind. Shizuka, head for the dam, he commanded. It's a dead end, she cried. No, Naruto said, a grim smile touching his lips. It's a trap, for them. The bus burst from the treeline and screeched to a halt on the wide, concrete service road atop the dam. The two black vans pulled up behind them, and the helicopters hovered overhead, pinning them in place. The doors of the vans opened, and a dozen more Oni Guard soldiers deployed, forming a semicircle, their energy rifles aimed. The emitters were set up, bathing the entire dam top in the sickening, chakra-suppressing field. A man in a slightly different uniform, his helmet's visor retracted to show a hard, scarred face, stepped forward. He was clearly the commander. Anomaly designated, Uzumaki. His voice boomed through an external speaker. You were ordered to surrender. You are a threat to the national security of Japan. Lay down your arms and surrender to our custody. Your Kampa, Nions will be treated as protected witnesses. Naruto stepped out of the bus, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Rei and Saeko moved to follow him, but he shot them a look that stopped them in their tracks. Trust me, that's a tempting offer, Naruto called out, his voice steady despite the waves of pain washing over him. But my friends and I are a package deal. The commander's eyes narrowed. Do not be a fool. You are outmatched. Your abilities are neutralized. There is no escape. You're probably right, Naruto admitted, taking another slow step forward. But you guys made one mistake. And what's that? The commander asked, a hint of condescending curiosity in his tone. Your soldiers, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over the disciplined, professional unit. You're not monsters. You're just following orders. You're trying to protect your country from something you don't understand. He saw a flicker of doubt in the eyes of a few of the younger soldiers. He was getting to them. This was a battle of ideology. Not just force. But there's a bigger monster coming. Something that wants to devour this whole country, this whole world. And you're wasting your time hunting me. The commander's face hardened. Enough talk. Final warning. Surrender or we open fire. Naruto smiled, a sad, tired smile. I really didn't want to have to hurt you guys. He took a deep breath, the pain in his head spiked to an agonizing crescendo. He felt a moment of intense vertigo, of disconnection from his own body. The world seemed to warp and twist. He was no longer on the dam. He was standing in a void. A landscape of dying stars and cold, empty space. Before him stood a figure, serene and impossibly ancient. The man was tall and slender, with pale white skin, long white hair, and two horn-like protrusions from his head. He wore elegant, flowing white robes. He had no eyebrows, and his eyes were a startling, blank lavender. "An Otsutsuki, you resist so pointlessly," the being said, his voice a calm, melodic hum that echoed in Naruto's mind. It was the same presence he had felt from the Alpha. This was the puppet master. "This world is dying to feed new life. My life. A god tree will blossom here. And I will ascend." "Who are you?" Naruto demanded, his mind reeling. He was in a mental landscape, a forced telepathic contact. "I am Cain," the being said, as if announcing his name was a great and magnanimous gift. "A humble gardener, planting a seed in fertile soil. The creatures you fight are merely my plows, tilling the land, breaking down the stubborn weeds of your civilization." He gestured to the void around them. "You are an aberration, a remnant of a power that should have faded long ago. A tool without a master." Cain took a step closer, his blank eyes filled with a clinical curiosity. "But you are a potent tool. Your energy, it is immense, even in this withered state. It could be useful. Serve me. Kneel. You and your mates will be spared the harvest. You will feast at my side as this world is reborn." Naruto felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He thought of all the people who had died, the screams, the burning city. He thought of this arrogant god wannabe calling it gardening. Single quote. "Go to hell," Naruto spat. Cain's serene expression did not change. "I am already there, and soon, I shall be its king." The being began to fade. This was a pleasant distraction. "Do try to survive these mortals. I find your struggle amusing." Naruto's eyes snapped open. He was back on the dam. Only a second had passed. The commander was giving the order to fire. "Take him down." But Naruto was already moving. The conversation with Cain, the sheer cosmic arrogance of the creature, had given him a focus, a cold fury that burned through the pain of the suppression field. He couldn't use his chakra, but Cain had reminded him of something else he had. A power that wasn't his own. A power that came from the world itself. He dropped to one knee, slamming his palm onto the concrete of the dam. "Sage art," he roared, the words tearing from his throat. He wasn't trying to mold sage chakra within himself, the field made that impossible. Instead, he was using his knowledge of sage art to do something else entirely. He was reaching out, not in, and taking direct command of the natural energy around him. It was incredibly dangerous, like trying to divert a river with his bare hands. The air itself seemed to answer his call. The water in the massive reservoir behind the dam began to churn. The concrete beneath their feet groaned. The commander froze, his order to fire dying on his lips. "What is he doing?" Naruto gritted his teeth, blood trickling from his nose from the sheer strain. He was using the dam itself as a giant sage art conduit. He pulled on the vast, kinetic energy of the water, the immense potential energy stored in the structure. "You wanted to see my power," Naruto yelled, his voice distorted, echoing with the power he was barely containing. "Here it is." With a final, desperate pull, he unleashed it. He didn't target the soldiers. He targeted their technology. The 5 suppression emitters exploded simultaneously in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The energy field collapsed. The sudden return of his chakra was like a tidal wave. It slammed into him, pure and clean and powerful. The pain in his head vanished, replaced by a surging, euphoric rush. The Oni guard were in disarray, their primary weapon against him gone. "Now," Naruto yelled. As one, his friends burst from the bus. But they weren't attacking. They were executing a plan he'd laid out in a few frantic seconds before he'd stepped outside. Shizuka threw the bus into reverse, screeching backward. Kota and Takashi laid down suppressing fire with the captured rifles, their blue energy bolts forcing the soldiers to take cover. Naruto, now filled with sage chakra, was a golden blur. The orange pigment flared around his eyes. He didn't attack the soldiers directly. He moved between them, a phantom of speed and force. A chop to the neck here, a sweep of the legs there. He disarmed them, disabled them, neutralized them with the cold efficiency of an Anbu captain. He moved through their ranks like a fox in a henhouse. The commander, seeing his unit dismantled in seconds, drew a wicked-looking combat knife and charged Naruto, his face a mask of desperation. For Japan, Naruto didn't even break stride. He caught the commander's knife hand, used his momentum to spin him around, and applied a perfect sleeper hold. The commander struggled for a moment, then went limp, slumping to the ground unconscious. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. The entire elite unit was scattered across the dam, unconscious or disarmed, but alive. Not a single one had been killed. Naruto stood in the middle of them all, his chest heaving, the golden sage energy slowly receding. His friends stared from the bus, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. They had seen him fight. They had seen him use his power. But this was different. This was utter, absolute dominance. He walked over to the unconscious commander and knelt beside him. He took the man's comms unit. A small device clipped to his tactical vest. He reactivated it. "This is the anomaly," Naruto said, his voice calm and clear, broadcasting on the Oni Guard's private channel, a message to whoever was on the other end. "Your unit has been neutralized. They are all alive. I am not your enemy." He paused, his eyes looking out at the broken world. "A greater storm is coming. An entity that calls himself Cain. He is the source of this plague. He wants to consume this world. Tell your masters to stop hunting the one person who can help them weather it." He dropped the comms unit on the commander's chest. He turned and walked back to the bus, the faces of his friends watching him from the windows. Rei looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. Saeko's were burning with an intensity that bordered on worship. He climbed aboard. The engine was already running. No one said a word. There were no words for what they had just witnessed. They had been prey, hunted by an elite force with technology designed to kill a god. And in the end, their god had simply reminded the hunters of their mortality and then let them live. The bus pulled away, leaving the defeated Oni Guard in their wake. They were no longer just survivors. They were the followers of a power that defied comprehension, a boy who could bargain with gods and dismantle armies. And they were heading back into a world that was growing darker by the minute. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Fortress of the Forgotten. The dam was a turning point. It had been a crucible, burning away the last vestiges of who they were and reforging them into something new. The dynamic in the bus had shifted from a democracy of survival to a quiet, unspoken monarchy. There was Naruto, and then there was everyone else. The battle with the Oni Guard had not just been a victory, it had been a demonstration. He hadn't just defeated them, he had systematically dismantled their every advantage, technology, tactics, and ideology, and then showed them mercy. It was the act of a king, not a cornered animal. They drove in silence for hours, the captured energy rifles and disabled tactical gear a testament to the battle they had survived. Takashi no longer looked sullen. He looked thoughtful, re-evaluating everything he thought he knew. Saya was furiously reverse engineering one of the rifles, her muttering a mix of awe and scientific curiosity. Shizuka drove with a new, grim focus, and Rei and Saeko, they watched him. Rei's gaze was one of profound awe mixed with a thread of fear. She was in the presence of something truly epic, a force of nature she was only beginning to comprehend. Saiko's was different. It was the look of a zealot who has found her messiah. The thrill she got from combat was nothing compared to the resonant, soul-deep satisfaction of witnessing his absolute dominance. He was the embodiment of the very ideal of strength she had always worshipped. Naruto himself felt a change. The encounter with Cain had stripped away any lingering denial about his situation. This was not just a zombie apocalypse. It was the opening salvo of an interdimensional war, and he was, once again, on the front line. The weariness was still there, but now it was overlaid with a cold, sharp-edged purpose. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a guardian. This small, broken world was now his to protect. "We can't keep running," he said, his voice breaking the long silence. The bus fell so quiet they could hear the engine humming. "The bus is falling apart. We're burning through fuel and food. And we're too exposed. We need a base. A real one. A place to fortify, train, and plan. A castle." Kota breathed, his eyes wide. "Exactly," Naruto affirmed. "Saya, you know this area. Think, where would you go? Large, defensible, isolated. But with access to resources. Saya pushed her glasses up her nose, her mind instantly shifting into high gear. Most public buildings are death traps. Schools, hospitals, government offices, all compromised on day one. We need something with limited entry points, strong construction, and a wealth of supplies on site. She thought for a moment, her finger tapping her chin. There's one place. It's a long shot. The Tokanasu Central Shopping Mall. It was under final construction when the outbreak hit. It never had its grand opening. A mall, Takashi scoffed. Full of glass windows. It's a fishbowl. Not this one. Saya countered immediately. It was a pet project of a paranoid billionaire. The entire structure is reinforced concrete, the glass is all shatterproof and hurricane rated. And it has its own power substation and a deep well water reclamation system. It was designed to be a luxury fallout shelter masquerading as a retail space. Most importantly, because it never opened. The only people inside would have been a skeleton crew of construction workers and security. The horde will have no reason to be concentrated there. Naruto's eyes lit up. It was perfect. That's it. That's our castle. Take us there. The mall was a monolith of concrete and dark, reflective glass rising from the sprawling suburbs like a forgotten tombstone. Saya was right. The parking garage was vast and empty. The silence within its concrete levels deep and profound. There were no shambling hordes, only the echo of their bus's engine. They found a handful of them, a few unfortunate construction workers. Easily dispatched in the echoing quiet. The place was clean. They parked the bus in the subterranean loading bay, a vast cavern of concrete and steel roll-up doors. Naruto stood in the center of it, slowly turning, his senses extending. He could feel the sheer size of the place, the strength of its bones. This is it, he said, a note of finality in his voice. This is home. The first week was a blur of frenetic, purposeful activity. The survival phase was over, the dominion phase had begun. Under Naruto's direction, they transformed from a band of refugees into a disciplined unit of settlers. He was no longer just a leader, he was a governor, a chief, a daimyo. His first order of business was security. He, Saeko, and Takashi systematically cleared the entire multi-level structure, a methodical, floor-by-floor sweep. It was a bonding experience of a different sort. Naruto's calm professionalism, Seiko's lethal grace, and Takashi's newfound determination made a highly effective hunter-killer team. They found a few more stragglers, but the mall was, for all intents and purposes, a sealed sanctuary. They welded the secondary entrances shut, leaving only the main loading bay, reinforced with a salvage delivery truck as a barricade, as their single point of entry and exit. Naruto established a command structure based on skill. Saya, with her encyclopedic knowledge, became their head of engineering and logistics. She and Kota worked tirelessly to get the mall's systems online, restoring power to key sections and reactivating the water pumps. Kota, in his element, became their quartermaster and armorer, setting up a workshop to maintain their scavenged weapons and jury-rig new ones. Shizuka, to everyone's surprise, had a green thumb, and she began cultivating an impressive rooftop garden in the massive atrium, a vital source of fresh food. And at the heart of it all was the triad of Naruto, Rei, and Saeko. Their roles evolved naturally. Naruto was the undisputed commander. His word law, but he delegated. He tasked Saeko with a role she was born for, head of security and training. She became the drill sergeant, the master at arms. She took the other survivors, a few more they had picked up on the road, a terrified family they found hiding in a nearby warehouse, and began to forge them into a capable militia. Her methods were strict, demanding, but fair. She commanded respect born of pure, undiluted competence. Rei found her calling not in combat, but in governance. She had a natural empathy, an ability to read people and settle disputes. She became the heart of their small community, managing internal affairs, rationing supplies, and maintaining morale. She was the logistics officer to Seiko's combat commander, the civilian government to her military arm. Where Saeko was the sword, Rei was the hand that kept the society running. The romantic tensions that had simmered on the road finally came to a head in the quiet safety of their new fortress. The unspoken thing between the three of them was a force of nature that could not be ignored. It was Saeko who initiated it. She found Naruto late one night on the roof, staring out at the dead, silent city lights. You are carrying too much, she said, coming to stand beside him. You are their god, their king, their hope. It is too heavy a burden for one man. I've carried worse, he said, his voice quiet. You don't have to, she replied, her voice dropping. She stepped in front of him, her lavender eyes searching his. In my world, the strong rule. But they do not rule alone. They surround themselves with those they trust. With those who make them stronger. She reached out, her hand resting on his chest, directly over his heart. I am yours, Naruto. In spirit, in loyalty, and in the sword I wield. I will be your weapon, your shield, your counselor. Let me share the burden. Her confession was not one of flighty romance. It was a pledge of fealty, a warrior's oath. It was the deepest expression of love she was capable of, and he understood it completely. He saw in her a partner who would stand with him at the gates of hell, a smile on her face. He covered her hand with his own. A silent acceptance of her vow. Later that same night, as if drawn by the same gravitational pull, Rei found him in the vast, empty food court they had claimed as their central common area. She brought him a cup of hot tea she'd found. You're still awake, she said, her voice soft. She sat beside him on one of the bolted-down tables. Too much to do, he said, accepting the cup. She was silent for a moment. Gathering her courage, Saeko-senpai. She is in love with you, she stated, not with jealousy, but with a simple, observant clarity. And I think you feel something for her, too. Naruto didn't deny it, he just looked at her, waiting. And me, Rei continued, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if it's love. It's too new, too big. But I know that when I'm near you, the world makes sense. The fear goes away. I feel like I can breathe. She looked down at her hands. I'm not a warrior like her. I can't fight at your side in the same way. But I can hold this place together for you. I can make sure you have a home to come back to. I can be the calm in your storm. She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. Is there room for that? Is there room for me? He looked at this girl, who had grown from a damsel in distress to the bedrock of their community, and felt a wave of profound affection and warmth. She was his anchor, his reason to fight. The embodiment of the peace he was fighting for. Where Saeko was the thrilling clang of steel on steel, Rei was the quiet comfort of the hearth fire after the battle was won. He set the cup down and reached out. Taking her hand. Rei, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. There will always be room for you. The next evening, he brought them both to his new quarters, the spacious manager's office overlooking the main atrium. He faced them, the two pillars of his new life. I'm not from this world, he began, and he told them everything. Not the specifics of ninjutsu or tailed beasts, but the broad, metaphorical strokes. He told them of a previous life where he was a lonely outcast, a pariah hated for a power he didn't ask for. He told them of a world of constant war, of losing friends. Of fighting to protect a home that didn't always love him back. He told them of the profound loneliness that had followed him even into this new life. The rules of my old world. The rules of the world that just died. They don't apply anymore, he said, his gaze moving between them. I look at you, Saeko, and I see a partner, a warrior whose spirit matches my own. Your strength inspires me. I can't imagine a battle without you by my side. Seiko's breath hitched, her stoic facade cracking with emotion. And I look at you, Rei, he continued, turning to her. And I see peace. I see a home. You ground me. You give all this fighting a purpose. You are the reason I want to win. Rei's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. He took a deep breath. I don't know what this is. I don't know what to call it. But I know that my life is better, stronger, with both of you in it. I won't choose. I can't. I love you both, differently, but completely. If that's not something you can accept, I'll understand. But that's the truth. He laid his heart bare. The silence that followed was thick with 1,000 unspoken emotions. It was Rei who moved first. She stepped forward and took his hand. Then she turned and held her other hand out to Saeko. Saeko looked at the offered hand, then at Rei's open, honest face, and finally at Naruto's. She saw no deception, no manipulation. Only a raw, desperate honesty. She took Rei's hand. They stood there, a triangle of 3 interconnected souls, their hands joined. It was not a conventional relationship, but it was theirs. Forged in the apocalypse, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared trauma, and a profound, undeniable love. They were a triad, the ruling heart of their new fortress. But the world outside did not wait. Their newfound peace was destined to be shattered. The first sign came from a scouting mission. Naruto and Saeko, moving like ghosts through the dead city to map out rival survivor groups and zombie migration patterns, found a scene of utter carnage. A small community, holed up in a fortified library, had been wiped out. But it wasn't the work of the dead. The bodies were torn apart with a savage, deliberate force. And on the wall, painted in blood, was a single, chilling symbol, the same comma-shaped tomo that had been on the forehead of the Alpha. A message. The attack on the mall came 2 nights later. It was not a mindless horde. It was a disciplined, tactical assault. A pack of 24 alphas, moving in silent, coordinated formations, swarmed the perimeter. They didn't shamble, they sprinted. They didn't claw at the walls, they tested for weaknesses. The alarm, a series of air horns jury-rigged by Kota, blared through the mall. Naruto's militia, trained by Saeko, rushed to their defensive positions on the roof and upper-level windows. But the alphas were just a distraction. A massive explosion blew the main loading bay door off its hinges. The truck they'd used as a barricade was thrown aside like a child's toy. Standing in the smoking entrance was a single man. He was dressed in the tattered remains of a JSDF uniform, but his eyes glowed with the same malevolent red light as the alphas. His body was wreathed in a dark, corrupt energy that felt like a twisted mockery of chakra. On his forehead was the tomo, glowing like a brand. The Pretender King emerges from his castle of glass. The man snarled, his voice a distorted rasp. My master, the great Kane, is displeased. He has sent me, Kenji, his first ascended, to deliver his judgment. Naruto, flanked by Saeko and Rei, stood on the mezzanine overlooking the loading bay. Behind them, their small militia held their ground, terrified but resolute. Kane can deliver his own messages, Naruto called down. His own power beginning to rise, a golden aura shimmering around him. Tell your master if he wants my castle, he can come and try to take it. Kenji laughed, a harsh, grating sound. My Master does not dirty his hands with insects. He has given me a piece of his power to crush you. He held out a hand, and a sphere of roiling, dark energy, a twisted parody of a Rasengan, formed in his palm. This world is weak, it needs to be purified by fire. Only the strong deserve to live in the new world Kane will build. He hurled the sphere. It shot toward the mezzanine, not with the grinding power of a Rasengan, but with the explosive force of a bomb. Naruto moved instantly, pushing Rei and Saeko behind him. He formed a Rasengan of his own, meeting the dark sphere head-on. The two attack. KS collided in a thunderous explosion of gold and black energy that shook the entire mall to its foundations. The force threw Naruto back, but he held his ground, skidding to a halt. The first true Chakra vs Chakra battle of this world had begun. Saeko, Rei, take command. Repel the alphas. Kenji is mine. Naruto roared, leaping down from the mezzanine to land on the loading bay floor, 20 feet below. Saeko and Rei didn't hesitate. You heard him. Seiko's voice rang out like a clarion call. Archers, focus fire on the climbers. Melee squad, with me. We hold this ramp. Rei directed the other half of the force, sending them to reinforce weak points, her voice calm and authoritative over the comms system Saya had built. The battle for the mall raged on 2 fronts. Above, a desperate struggle against intelligent, predatory monsters. Below, a duel between 2 beings of impossible power. Kenji was fast, his movements enhanced by Kane's dark energy. He wielded his power like a club, sending out waves of concussive force and blades of dark energy. He was a berserker, fueled by fanaticism and borrowed power. Naruto was his opposite. He flowed like water, his sage-enhanced taijutsu a whirlwind of precise, debilitating strikes. He was fighting smarter, not harder, conserving his energy. He saw the flaw in Kenji's power. It was strong, but it was inefficient. It was a fire hose without a nozzle, spraying energy wildly. Kenji was a battery. Naruto was a dynamo. They exchanged blows that cracked the concrete beneath their feet. Kenji was driven by a mad zeal, screaming praises to Kane as he fought. Naruto was silent, his focus absolute. He was a general on the battlefield, analyzing, adapting, and waiting for his moment. The moment came. Kenji, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, gathered all his energy for one final, massive attack. A great spear of black lightning formed in his hands. Naruto saw his opening. He didn't try to meet the attack. He formed two shadow clones. As Kenji hurled the spear, the clones charged forward, not to block it, but to slam into Kenji's legs from either side, breaking his stance, spoiling his aim. The spear of black lightning went wide, carving a massive, molten trench in the wall of the loading bay. And in that instant of imbalance, the real Naruto was there. He hadn't formed a Rasengan. He had gathered his sage chakra into his palm, shaping it into a blade of pure wind, sharp enough to cut through diamonds. Sage art. Wind blade. He didn't aim for the kill. He swept the blade across Kenji's chest. The attack was so fast, so sharp, that Kenji didn't even realize he'd been hit until he saw the deep gash open up on his torso, dark energy bleeding out like smoke. He stared down at the wound, then up at Naruto, his glowing eyes wide with disbelief. "How? Your power is borrowed," Naruto said, his voice cold. "You're just a container. You don't understand its nature. You never stood a chance." Kenji clutched his wound, stumbling back. He snarled, "A cornered, wounded animal. This isn't over. The Ascended are many. Lord Kane himself will come and unmake you." With a final burst of dark energy, he blew a hole in the side wall of the loading bay and fled into the night, the remaining alphas melting back into the darkness with him. Silence fell over the loading bay, broken only by the panting of Naruto and the distant sounds of the militia finishing off the last of the alphas. The battle was won. Their fortress had held. Rei and Saeko rushed to his side. "Are you hurt?" Rei asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "I'm fine," he said, the sage mode receding, leaving him weary but not spent. Saeko looked at the gash in the wall, then at the smoking hole Kenji had used to escape. "He will be back, with more." "I know," Naruto said, his gaze hard. "And we'll be ready." He looked around at his home. It was damaged, scarred, but it was still standing. He looked at his people, who were cheering their victory, their morale higher than ever. He looked at the two women by his side, his sword in his heart. They had faced their first real test as a kingdom, and they had prevailed. But Kenji's threat lingered in the air. This was just the beginning. The shadow of Kane was growing longer, and the real war was just getting started. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Altar of the Star Eater. The victory against Kenji and his alphas left a scar on their new home, but it was a scar of pride. The scorched concrete and buckled steel of the loading bay were not signs of weakness, but proof that they had been tested by a supernatural force and had not broken. Morale soared. They had defended their fortress. They were no longer just hiding. They were a power to be reckoned with. But for Naruto, the victory was a chilling revelation. Kane wasn't just a distant, philosophical threat. He had lieutenants, fanatical human converts gifted with a dark, twisted version of chakra. The Ascended. Kenji was just the first. How many more were there? In the days that followed, the fortress buzzed with renewed purpose. Saeko doubled down on training the militia, incorporating drills specifically designed to counter the speed and pack tactics of the alphas. Kota and Saya, in a frenzy of creative genius, began analyzing the residue of Kenji's dark energy. They worked to develop countermeasures, reinforcing their defenses with salvaged materials and a new understanding of their enemy. Naruto, however, grew more withdrawn. He spent hours in their new intelligence hub, the mall's former security office, poring over the data from the battle. The key, he knew, was Kane. Kenji was just a symptom. To win the war, they had to understand the general, not just kill his soldiers. He called himself a gardener. Naruto murmured to himself one afternoon, staring at a map of the prefecture marked with zombie sightings and strange energy readings Saya had been tracking. "He's tilling the soil, preparing it for a god tree." Saya, who was calibrating a makeshift energy sensor nearby, looked up. "It's a metaphor, obviously. A rather grandiose one." "No," Naruto said, a dawning horror in his eyes. It's not. In my old world, the god tree was real. It was a parasitic entity that drained the planet of all its life, its natural energy, to produce a single, all-powerful fruit. He looked at Saya, his expression grim. The zombies, they're not just a plague. They're a terraforming engine. Every person they kill, every bit of life they extinguish, is like fertilizer. It's a process of decay, breaking down this world's life force to make it digestible for his seed. The room went cold. The scale of the threat was suddenly, terrifyingly cosmic. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting to stop their entire planet from being eaten. This changes the strategic priority, Saya said, her voice dropping its usual sarcastic tone, replaced by one of grave seriousness. We cannot win a war of attrition against an enemy that feeds on our losses. We must target the source. We need to find Cain, or at the very least, disrupt his gardening. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Kota, while cataloging the captured Oni Guard equipment, managed to activate the commander's helmet recorder. It contained several encrypted audio logs. Saya, with her Savon-like ability to crack code, spent a day and a night breaking the encryption. Most of it was military jargon, but the last log, recorded just before the assault on the dam, was a conversation between the commander and Suichiro Takagi. The anomaly's energy signature is unique, the commander's voice crackled from the speaker. But it is not the only one we are tracking. There is a larger, more stable emission source deep in the Key Mountains. It appeared on our long-range sensors the same day as the outbreak. We believe they may be connected. Naruto went still. The Key Mountains. Where? Saya cross-referent. CED the coordinates mentioned in the log with her own energy signature map. A single point glowed ominously. It's an old, remote region. Mostly abandoned shrines and nature preserves. The energy reading there is massive. Stable, constant, and ancient. It's not like the chaotic spikes we see from zombie hordes, or the sharp, violent signature Kenji gave off. This is a deep well of power. That's it, Naruto said, his voice firm. That's his nexus, his main base, or the site he's preparing for the seedling. We have to go there. We have to see what it is. It was a perilous proposition. A long-range expedition into unknown territory, leaving their fortress partially undefended. Rei was against it. It's too dangerous, she argued, standing before the three of them in the command center. You just said it yourself. Kenji will be back. We can't afford to split our forces. Rei, if we just sit here and wait, we lose, Naruto countered gently. We'll be defending against an enemy that gets stronger every day while our world dies around us. This is the only proactive move we have. We need intelligence. We have to take the fight to him. Saeko sided with Naruto, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. A fortress is a tomb if you never leave it. We must be the sword that strikes at the heart of the enemy, not just the shield that parries his blows. In the end, Rei relented, her faith in Naruto's judgment overriding her fear. A small, elite team was assembled. Naruto, Saeko, Kota for his firepower and technical skills, and Saya for her analytical mind. Rei would stay behind, in command of them all. Their queen holding the castle. Takashi, to his credit, accepted his role as her second in command without complaint, his loyalty now firm. The farewell was tense and heartfelt. Rei hugged Naruto tightly at the loading bay doors, her face buried in his chest. Come back, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Always, he promised, kissing the top of her head. He then turned to Saeko, who was checking the straps on her new gear, a razor-sharp katana she had found in the mall's high-end collectibles store. Their farewell was unspoken, a shared look of fierce determination and absolute trust. She was his partner in this, his other half on the battlefield. They took a modified, armored SUV, loaded with supplies and weapons. The journey into the mountains was a descent, into a world that was actively being unmade. The further they got from the city, the stranger things became. The zombies here were different. They were twisted, mutated. Some had branches growing out of their bodies, their flesh merging with the forest floor. The animals were worse. They saw deer with too many eyes and flesh that seemed to rot and regenerate, and packs of wild dogs that moved with The same predatory intelligence as the alphas. Kane's influence was bleeding into the very fabric of nature, warping it into something monstrous. After 2 days of navigating treacherous mountain roads and fighting off corrupted wildlife, they had to abandon the vehicle. The energy signature was coming from a place no car could reach. They continued on foot, deeper into a primeval forest that felt wrong. The very air thick and heavy with corrupt energy. They found it at the heart of the ancient forest. A massive, forgotten shrine complex, built around a colossal, gnarled tree that seemed impossibly old. The shrine was built from a dark, unfamiliar stone, and the architecture was unlike any Naruto had ever seen, even in his own world. But the most chilling part was the energy. It poured from this place in waves. A suffocating presence of immense, dark power. "This is the place," Kota whispered, his bravado gone, replaced by a primal fear. As they crept closer, they saw the carvings. The walls of the shrine were covered in intricate, detailed reliefs. They were not of gods or spirits of this world. "Otsutsuki," Naruto breathed, tracing a finger over a carving of a horned being descending from the stars. The images told a story of a clan of celestial beings who traveled between worlds. A story of the god tree, of the chakra fruit, and a story of one of their own, banished for some unnamed transgression. Cast down into this dimension, this primitive world, to be forgotten. A carving depicted him, a figure with a single, central horn, being forced through a swirling portal. "Kane, this whole shrine," Saya said, her mind racing, "it's not a place of worship. It's a prison, or a monument to a prisoner. He's been here for millennia," Naruto realized. Waiting. And the outbreak, it wasn't just an attack. It was him breaking his chains. The energy of so much death at once must have given him the power to finally act. As the weight of this revelation settled over them, the air in the central courtyard of the shrine began to shimmer. A towering, semi-transparent image flickered to life before them, a hologram of pure, malevolent energy. It was Kane. He stood 50 feet tall, a ghostly projection of the serene, white-robed being from Naruto's vision. "The little mice have found my nest," his voice boomed, not through the air, but directly inside their minds. It was a voice of ancient arrogance and infinite patience. He looked down at them, his blank lavender eyes filled with dismissive amusement. His gaze fell upon Naruto. "The aberration," Kane mused. "You are more resourceful than I anticipated. You have even found this monument to my unjust exile. Your exile ends here, Kane," Naruto shot back, stepping forward, his hand resting on a pouch of kunai. "This world is not yours to eat." Kane laughed, a sound like grinding galaxies. "Brave words, but you misunderstand your place. You are not a hero saving his world. You are a germ, a bacterium resisting the inevitable. This planet is my birthright. Its essence will fuel my ascension, and I will reclaim my rightful place among the stars. Your extinction is a footnote in my glorious return." He didn't intend to fight them directly. He was a projection, an echo. His true body was elsewhere. But he was not without defenses. However, Kane's projection continued, a cruel smile on his ethereal face. "I cannot have vermin scurrying through my larder. Let this be your final lesson." He raised a ghostly hand. The ground began to tremble. The centerpiece of the shrine's courtyard, a massive, 30-foot-tall statue carved in the likeness of an armored, multi-limbed warrior, began to crack. The stone groaned as dark, corrupt energy, Kane's energy, poured into it. The stone eyes of the statue glowed with a fiery red light. With a sound of tearing rock, the guardian statue ripped itself free from its pedestal. It was a golem of immense size and power, armed with 6 stone swords, its bod. "Why wreathed in the same dark chakra as Kenji? It's beautiful," Kota whispered in horrified awe. "A Class 5 animated construct." The guardian moved, its steps shaking the ground. It raised its 6 SWORDs and brought them down in a devastating volley. Naruto and the others scattered, the stone swords shattering the ancient flagstones where they had just been standing. "Conventional weapons are useless," Saya yelled, diving behind a crumbling wall. "Its body is infused with his energy. It will regenerate." She was right. Kota fired a volley from a captured energy rifle, the bolts striking the guardian's chest and blasting away chunks of stone. But the dark energy swirled, and the stone reformed in seconds. This was a battle they couldn't win with brute force. It was a puzzle. Saeko, with me. We need to keep it occupied. Naruto yelled. He drew a kunai, channeling a sliver of wind chakra into it, making it razor sharp. Saeko drew her katana, her face a mask of joyous, lethal concentration. They became a blur of motion. They were two gnats harassing a giant. Saeko was a flowing stream of steel, her blade deflecting the massive stone swords, the impact sending shockwaves up her arms. She was not trying to damage it, but to redirect its momentum, to keep it off balance. Naruto was a flash of gold, running up the creature's arms, along its shoulders, his wind-enhanced kunai striking at the joints. Trying to find a weak point. But the enchanted stone was too hard. Kota, covering fire, aim for its head, keep its attention divided. Naruto yelled over the comms. Saya, find a weakness. Now would be good. Explosive rounds from Kota's custom-built anti-materiel rifle detonated against the Guardian's face, doing little more than angering it. Saya, meanwhile, was not hiding. She was running, her eyes scanning the giant, not as a warrior, but as an engineer. She saw the lines of energy flowing through its body, the dark chakra concentrating in certain nodes before it regenerated damage. Its chest. Saya's voice crackled over the comms. There's a focal point, a nexus where the energy is channeled from. It's right in the center of its torso. If you can disrupt that, you might be able to overload the entire construct. The Guardian, enraged by Kota's shots, swatted Saeko aside, sending her tumbling through the air. She landed hard, her katana skittering across the stones. The golem raised a massive stone foot to crush her. Naruto saw it. Time seemed to slow. There was no time for a plan. No time for subtlety. There was only one option. One, final, desperate gambit. He landed on the ground. Planting his feet, he brought his hands together. Sage mode, he roared. The power came instantly, a flood of golden energy. But he didn't stop there. He reached deeper, pushing past his limits. Pulling on every ounce of power he possessed, calling upon the training he had received in another lifetime, from the spirit of the Sage of Six Paths himself. A black circle appeared on the back of his shirt. 9 tomo marks arranged in a circle. His pupils became a cross of vertical toad slits and horizontal fox slits. His skin glowed with an inner, golden light. For a fleeting, desperate moment, he tapped into the true power of the Six Paths Sage mode. The power was overwhelming, a star contained in a human body. It was agony and ecstasy. He felt his very cells screaming in protest. This world was not meant for such power. He raised his hand. A swirling vortex of wind and fire appeared, a Rasenshuriken, but this one was different. It was black, infused with the raw, elemental power of lava. Lava release. Rasenshuriken. He didn't throw it. He couldn't afford to miss. With a roar that was more animal than human, he charged, a golden comet of unimaginable power. The Guardian swung its swords at him. But they shattered into dust against the sheer force of his chakra shroud. He slammed the lava release, Rasenshuriken directly into the nexus point on the Guardian's chest that Saya had identified. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The spinning blades of molten chakra and wind didn't just cut, they unraveled the dark energy holding the golem together. The Guardian froze, a look of what could only be described as shock on its stone face. A network of glowing orange cracks spread across its body, originating from the Rasenshuriken. The golem exploded. It was not a normal explosion of rock and dust. It was an implosion of dark energy, followed by an outward blast of pure, golden sage power, Naruto's power. The shockwave leveled what was left of the shrine, vaporized Kane's ghostly projection, and threw Saeko, Kota, and Saya back hundreds of feet. The world went white. When their vision returned, they saw a crater where the Guardian had been. And at the center of it, lying broken and unconscious, was Naruto. The Six Paths Sage mode was gone. He was just a boy again, his body flickering like a dying flame, steam rising from his skin. The effort had shattered his right arm, the bone visible through the torn flesh, and had burned out his chakra network completely. Saeko was the first to reach him. She fell to her knees, gathering his limp form into her arms. His breathing was shallow, his heartbeat a faint, fluttering rhythm. He was alive, but barely. Naruto, she cried, her voice cracking, her iron composure finally breaking. He had won. He had faced down the avatar of a god and obliterated it. But the price was devastating. He had poured nearly his entire life force into that one, final attack. The energy he had unleashed, however, had done more than just destroy the Guardian. It had acted as a catalyst. A beacon. Miles away, in the heart of Tokyo, at the base of the skytree, the seed Kane had planted, a concentration of pure potential, pulsed. Fed by the massive surge of pure, natural energy Naruto had just unleashed, it began to grow. A column of dark light erupted from the ground, piercing the clouds. The real war had just begun, and its greatest champion had just fallen. Chapter 6 End.